Imagine a company so powerful, it had its own army, its own navy, its own prisons. It collected taxes, declared wars, and ruled over 200 million people. It wasn't a government, it was a corporation. This is the story of the East India Company, the most powerful, most profitable, and most terrifyingly evil business in human history. It started with spices. In 1600, a group of English merchants convinced Queen Elizabeth I to give them a royal charter, basically a permission slip, to trade in Asia. The idea was simple. Buy spices cheap in India, sell them expensive back in Europe. Normal business stuff, boring even. But here's where things get interesting. The company wasn't funded by the crown. It was funded by private investors, regular merchants pooling their money together for a share of the profits. Sound familiar? It's basically the world's first stock company, and for a while it worked. Ships came back loaded with goods. Investors got rich. Everyone was happy. But power is a drug. And the East India Company was about to get very, very addicted. By the mid-1600s, the company had set up trading posts along the Indian coast, places like Bombay, Madras, and Calcutta. But trade posts needed protection, so the company hired guards, then soldiers, then an entire army. At its peak, the East India Company's private army had over 200,000 soldiers. That's twice the size of the British Army at the time. Let that sink in. A private company had a bigger military than the country that created it. And they used it. The company started picking sides in local Indian conflicts, backing certain rulers, undermining others. Every time they helped someone win a war, they demanded territory as payment. By the 1750s, the company wasn't just trading in India, it was governing India, collecting taxes, running courts, and doing whatever it took to squeeze out every rupee it could. Now we get to the part of the story that textbooks often skip. Because what happened next wasn't just greed, it was a catastrophe. In 1770, a devastating drought hit Bengal, one of the most fertile and populous regions of India. Crops failed, food ran out, people started dying. And what did the East India Company do? They kept collecting taxes at the same rate, while people starved. They even raised taxes on the remaining food supply to make up for lost revenue. Company profits had to be protected, no matter what. By the time the famine ended, an estimated 10 million people had died. That's roughly 1/3 of Bengal's entire population, gone. But India wasn't the only victim. The East India Company also destroyed China, and they did it with drugs. The company had a problem. They wanted Chinese silk, tea, and porcelain, but China didn't want anything Britain was selling. So the company started growing opium in India and smuggling it into China illegally on a massive scale. Within decades, millions of Chinese citizens were addicted. The Chinese government tried to ban it. They destroyed shipments. They begged Britain to stop. Britain's response? War. Twice. The Opium Wars forced China to open its ports and legalize the drug trade. The East India Company didn't just sell opium, it used military force to make sure the addiction continued. Back in Britain, people were starting to notice. Journalists wrote about the famines. Politicians asked uncomfortable questions. And one man in particular made it his mission to expose the company. Edmund Burke spent years in Parliament arguing that the company had turned an entire civilization into a money machine, that its rule was not trade, it was tyranny. Slowly, the British government started reining it in. The Regulating Act of 1773, the India Act of 1784, Parliament chipped away at the company's independence piece by piece. But the final blow came from an unlikely place, its own soldiers. In 1857, Indian soldiers, called sepoys, serving in the company's army, rose up in rebellion. History calls it the Indian Rebellion of 1857. The The company called it a mutiny. The Indians called it their first war of independence. The rebellion spread across northern India. It took over a year and enormous British military force to suppress it, but it couldn't be ignored. The East India Company had lost control. In 1858, the British government did something unprecedented. They dissolved the East India Company entirely. The British Crown took direct control of India. The company, the most powerful corporation in history, was gone. But here's the thing about the East India Company. It never really went away, not completely. The borders it drew, the institutions it built, the famines it caused, the drug trade it normalized, all of it echoes through history. India's economic underdevelopment for over a century? Partly the company's doing.
The modern opioid crisis? You can draw a line from Bengal's poppy fields. And perhaps most chillingly, it proved that a corporation, if given enough power and not enough oversight, will always choose profit over people. Always. The East India Company wasn't unique because it was evil. It was unique because it had no one to answer to. And that's a lesson history keeps trying to teach us. If you made it this far, you probably love history as much as we do. Subscribe if you want more stories like this, because trust me, this is just the beginning. Next week, we're covering the rise of Rockefeller. You don't want to miss it.